Hello everyone. I'm gonna try something different. We can do getting into some more advanced topics. So today we're gonna talk about turbocharged and complex operations. So let's do some definitions first of all. So what does complex mean? It means that an aircraft has a constant speed propeller, retractable gear, and flaps. So this is the Carenado's T210M. Has all of those things, and it's actually, in my opinion, the best flight model in any aircraft in any simulator with the reality expansion pack. So we'll use this today. Make sure we have gas. Okay, and then we'll talk about operations, with the gear, the propeller, and then we'll also cover the turbocharged. So this is a turbocharged engine. So what that means is that it uses the exhaust gas to spin a little fan and basically increase the manifold pressure above what's in the atmosphere. So if the atmospheric pressure that you're getting from the ATIS is like 2.9 or 9 or 2, you could boost the manifold pressure up to 35, on takeoff. And why would you want to do that? You're flying really high. These things can fly really high because they can preserve the pressure that's being created inside the engine. They're a maintenance nightmare, and there's some trade-offs in real life. But there's certain ways you have to respect the engine. You have to do something called stage cooling, and then you can't overboost it when you're taking off. But we'll cover that kind of stuff. Okay, so make sure we have a good view. Okay. So I found it's kind of hard, like flying with these weird views, but it's best for the camera and stuff. Okay. So to start, again, I always have your checklist. I have a T210M checklist I just found online and printed. Again, if anybody's watching it, I can upload all this stuff too. Okay, so first thing, starting engine, anti-collision light, so beacon light comes on. Mixture, I'm going to put at full rich. Propeller, so now we start worrying about the constant speed stuff. So if you can see this propeller control down here, it is a vernier knob just like the mixture, because again, if you're going to rip out power on a descent, you don't want to accidentally feather or almost feather the propeller or anything. So when the checklist item says propeller high RPM, this is high RPM and this is low RPM. But what does that actually mean? So the blade, when you have it set to a high RPM setting, the blade sitting out there is at a minimum pitch. So that means it's going to be like whatever power is going to the engine will. If you kind of picture this as the propeller, the blade out there is set to a minimum pitch. So it's just focused on spinning quickly. As you pull this out, what it actually does is it shoots oil into something called a governor, and it steepens the angle of the propeller. So what you're doing is you're taking larger chunks of the air, but you're moving less quickly. So when would you want to take larger chunks of the air? That would be when you're in cruise flight. It's better to have a fast spinning or a slower propeller that's taking larger chunks out of the air, and it's also less loud. When you're in trying to take off, well, you want all the power that you can have, so you want the thing spinning as quickly as it will possibly go. So real quick here, this is kind of what's going on. So you have here would be like your blue or your throttle or lever, and then what you're doing is you're controlling oil that's down here, and these flywheels are sensing how fast the propeller is spinning. So the faster, so what that means then is if in the air that you're flying and suddenly the propeller starts speeding up, well, these flywheels will expand and through their own feedback loop automatically steepen the propeller a little bit. And then same thing, in the inverse, if you suddenly pitch up or something and it's not able to maintain the RPM, the flywheels will slow down and then they'll reduce the pitch of the propeller and then let it keep spinning more quickly. So a good way to think of this is it's like an RPM proposer. It allows you to suggest an RPM for the engine to be following, and then your black knob is now throttle. So that will I left that on for too long. So that I left the mixture rich for too long. So this manifold pressure control is now what will be your main throttle output, and then your RPMs will be kind of proposed through the RPM control. So again, mixture, we've vapor locked it, so we'll deal with that. It'll be mixture rich, propeller, and then throttle. We don't want to open definitely all the way. And then we can, same kind of thing, so we'll turn the master switch on. And this looks messed up because again I have this G1000 system out here. So we'll see what it wants here. Probably good. And then we'll crank it just like we would anything else. Okay, this thing's vapor locked still. So, normally it's just that's like the nice thing about these reality expansion packs are they're realistic, that you kind of have to be careful. Okay, trying to break the vapor lock. Keep the brakes on there. Okay, there we go. All right. Then we turn our avionics on, and then check gauge is green. Now we can kind of go through check this again. Oil pressure looks good. Oil temperature looks good. And radios we can set, transponder standby. Okay, we're good. So then, kind of same as everything else.
Key West International Information Charlie. 1900 Zulu weather. Wind 120 at 10. Visibility more than 10. Sky clear, temperature 28, dew point 15. Altimeter 3001. Arriving runway 09, departing runway 09. Advise on initial contact you have Charlie.
Okay. Okay, now I can turn that off, and we have the important information. We're not going to go over this, all the stuff like we would in basics. Now we're good to start rolling. So runway 9 is what I would assume. And then what you'll notice on the ground is, so the prop right now is what we would call off governor. So we're pretty much just controlling the RPM and leaving the propeller alone. So taxi, you have the taxi. So as we kind of taxi over here, we can talk about these constant speed propeller operation. So in a complex aircraft, I like to think of it, there's like several checkpoints. So at 500 feet EGL, which we're about a sea level now, what we're going to do is, as long as we're clear of, we're past the end of the runway, we're past the tower, we can start turning to whatever direction we're going to. Once we're, trying to find something more interesting while we talk about it, okay? And then once we're 1,000 feet AGL, which again would just be 1,000 feet MSL here, we're going to do kind of our next thing, and then we can start messing with the propeller. So this concept is the same for, you know, whether you're doing the arrow or whatever. What you're doing is you're going to pull everything back to the green. So you're going to pull manifold pressure back to the green arc. You're going to pull the propeller control back to the green arc, which in this is 2,500 RPM, I think. And then you're going to climb at those settings. You're going to just you're going to keep everything green arc. And then the next time you kind of mess with stuff is when you're in cruise. You'll set the settings based on the POH for what you want your manifold pressure and your RPM to be. And then the last time you'll mess with the propeller is right before landing, when the propeller is again off the governor. So you're on short final probably. You pulled out a lot of power. You'll start to notice the RPMs are dropping below whatever you had it set to. And that's a good sign that the governor's no longer controlling prop. So then you can go ahead and push the whole thing forward. And those are really the only like 3 times that you'll be messing with the propeller. Throttle, because it's a turbocharged aircraft, it's different. So what it means is you can't just firewall it like you could on like a normally aspirated engine. So we're not going to jam the throttle over the board. What we're going to do is get it to so the POH publishes a recommended setting. So you can see the red line right here. In this plane, it's like 36 or pretty near 35. So 35 is fine. Because what you don't want to do is overboost it, which means you're putting more manifold pressure into the engine than it's rated for. So that would be with the red line up there on that manifold pressure. And let's just go over all that one more time when we get up here. And then we'll kind of go over like a run up, and then we'll review kind of our takeoff plan. Okay. So again, there's a discrepancy here because I'm using the G1000 really. But okay. So this manifold pressure is now what our throttle is going to control when we've reached a certain RPM that the propeller is so called on the governor. The RPMs then will be controlled by the propeller knob, which is this blue one, and then mixture is still going to be red. So just to review, when we take off, the first things we're going to do is we're going to accelerate to, so here you can see on the checklist it says power 36.5 inches and 2,700 RPM, which is just full forward. Lift nose at 65, climb at 90. So what we're going to do is we're going to advance the throttle until we get to 36.5, so very near the red line. And then we're going to let the propeller control be full forward. So that is going to approach our 2,700 RPM. And then we're going to lift the nose as it says at 65. We're going to climb out at 90. And then as soon as we're out of usable runway, we are going to retract the gear. So the first thing we're going to do is confirm positive rate so that we're actually climbing. And then we're going to, so I'm going to be getting those indications because I kind of messed up everything by forcing it to be G1000, but it's actually fine. So we're going to run out of runway, so the fact that, so once we're in a position that we couldn't make the runway again if something happened to the engine, then we're going to retract the gear with the big lever here. Then we're going to, so that's kind of our first thing. So accelerate 36.5, propeller's full forward, lift this nose wherever it says, and you can, for whatever plane you're flying in this one, is 65, start climbing at 90, retract the gear as soon as we're out of usable runway. Then, when we're 500 feet above the ground, we're going to make our turn as long as we're clear of the runway and the tower. We'll just go to the south for today. At 1,000 feet above the ground is when you can start messing with stuff because you don't want anything to have been broken, right? I mean, you don't want to break anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the manifold pressure back to the green arc. So yeah, again, it's just getting, don't worry about this, it's just getting confused because I have, like, I injected it with each 1000. So at 1,000 feet, AGL or MSL, because we're pretty much at sea level, we're going to pull power back to here, and we're going to pull the RPMs back to, we're going to pull the RPMs back to 2,500 RPM, and then we're going to climb out at 110 knots because that will allow better cooling. Cooling is the other thing that, so these big engines have cowl flaps now that you have to worry about. So closed and open. So we will leave, so here's another thing that you really only touch once. We will leave the cowl flaps open for climb out. And then as soon as we are at our cruise, then we can go ahead and close the cowl flaps. And then not worry about it too much until then, unless we're planning on making another climb, or unless cylinder head temperature, which is right here, that might be the place in whatever plane you're flying. If that starts to get too hot, anything over 400 degrees, you really want to avoid. So, you don't want it to kind of get in this area. Then we'll open them partially. But for now, so cowl flaps open, and then we'll climb. So, but my point was, after we're at 2,000 AGL, once we're at 1,000 AGL and we started pulling back the knobs, we're going to also speed up our climb a little bit to be a little nicer on the engine. Okay, so now here's the run-up in this taxiway, not taxiway. The run-up in this is very similar, so mixture full rich. We're going to see what it says here. I haven't messed with this one. Okay. So throttle 1,700 RPM. So again, what we're doing is we're advancing the throttle to get that RPM indication, and the manifold pressure will be whatever it wants to be. So slowly up to 1,700 RPM, and then let me zoom back in on this. 1,700 RPM, and then we're going to check the engine instruments. So green everywhere. It's fine. And then oil temperature, oil pressure, exterior panel, all of that's fine. We'll check the magnetos, same thing as we always would. Right set, that was fine, normal drop. And we'll check the left set. And then again, we're checking for just 50 RPM max difference. And then you'll notice on these checklists it will say propeller cycle. So what we're going to do is we're going to press the button. We're going to pull the propeller all the way out. Almost, I mean, in real life, you have to come back pretty far. What we're looking for is a 300 to 400 RPM drop. So, and we're going to do that 3 times, and the purpose is, there's a couple purposes. For one, we're making sure the governor works, and we're also cycling warm oil up through the propeller head. So here we go. Perfect. That was about a 300. Same thing here. Perfect. And then you're also looking for manifold pressure flow rise, and then you don't want it to go any more than that or kind of hang out down there for too long, or that gets hard on the engine. So 2 scenarios that are just generally not great on the engine is high power with a very coarse pitch, so blue knob pulled all the way out, and it's a different scenario in turbos, because normally you want to do something called fly them square. So that would mean you have like 23 inches of manifold pressure and 2,300 RPM, for example. But since this is turbocharged, it's capable of much more than that. So if you look at the power tables, I mean, common settings are, so again, this can go really high. So it depends how high you are, but at 8,000 feet, for example, if you want, you can have the manifold pressure all the way up at 30 inches for 2,300 RPM. And again, we're kind of working within the green here. So we briefed our takeoff. We'll pretend that we got our clearance and everything. Again, for more information on that, you can look at the other channel. This is just more advanced stuff for fun. And then we're gonna kind of go for it here. So, but we're gonna do our same thing. We're gonna say lights, so landing light, taxi light, strobe, camera, transponder, then action, mixture. We never checked idling. That's fine. So mixture to rich. Finals clear, take our brake off, and then we'll take off. And then, so remember, unlike the normally aspirated engines, like a 172 for example, we're not going to just jam the throttle forward. We're going to carefully advance it to get a very specific manifold pressure reading of 36.5 or close to it, and because what we don't want to do is overdose. Okay, it's the same kind of thing. Getting out on the runway, we've left our runway, and again, the view on the screen is a little bit different than the simulator because I have the G1000 set up, but it's fine. Okay, so here we're out here now. We're going to say take off, so we're going to advance our power, and you'll notice the turbo will kind of kick in, and that's realistic too. So you don't want to get carried away with it. So take off, look at your gauges, all instruments are green, kind of creep up to that 36.5. There's our 65. So gently rotate. We're looking for 90 thereabouts. You're going to tap the brakes, and then we're going to brake. And we're going to keep climbing at 90. So we're 400 feet above. You'll notice our RPMs are nice and high too, right here. And then, so we're 500, let's make our turn south. Nice, normal, coordinated turn. Always bug stuff if you can. Just right at here. 36.5. And when we're at 1,000, let's go higher. Let's go to 600. So when we're at 1,000 feet, AGL starts speeding up our climb a bit. What we're going to pull back first is the throttle. We're going to pull back the throttle until it's in the green arc, so at about 30. Then we're going to slowly pull the propeller back down to 2,500 RPM. And this is a good, now we're in like a cruise climb configuration. Why did we pull out the, I don't know if you were able to see it. So why did we pull out the throttle first before the RPM? Because again, the situation you want to avoid is if you would pull out our RPMs first, you would have had 36 inches of manifold pressure on 2,500. But that's a lot. You're kind of oversquaring there. So we're just trying to avoid situations like that. And then the opposite is true as well. So if we want a more aggressive climb. So like if we had been cruising and we wanted to climb again, the first thing we would do is set this at 2,400 RPM and then advance the throttle back to 30 inches or whatever we were hoping. Okay. So gears up, got our indications and everything, and let's just kind of head this way. We can actually stop at 25. So stop at 2,500, we'll kind of level out, and what we'll do is we'll just pull this maybe back to 28 inches manifold pressure. You can again look at the table depending on kind of what power setting you're looking for. Then we can pull this back to 2,300. So like notice now, we just did that very slowly. And then now, so this is kind of crazy. Look over. We're kind of making a traffic pattern. So in the downwind, we can kind of do our C-gums checklist. It's now really important. So that's clearance, gas, make sure you're rich, undercarriage. So always know your speed. So if you just right here, gear down at 140. So So gear, operate the gear at 104 knots. So as long as we're slower than that, then the gear should stay down. And we are. And again, we're kind of, let's just make a pattern here. With the clearance, which we get from the tower, gas, mixture switch, undercarriage. So we're going to say speed checks. Hold the hand on it. Always try to keep ample pressure in the green. Again, we're not pushing up the color, because if we do, it shoots up, and that's really bad. Because, relax the color, leave it set, look at it, and, we're kind of coming in for long industry here. And of course, the flaps up there. Three green, and prop is still in the governor. How do we know that? Because it's still what we proposed, right? It's still what we set it to. We had set it to be we had set it to be 2300 RPM, and it's still there. So yeah, I can't see much, but it's a good view. So the crossing numbers in this is like 70, 75. It's fine. Pavement's made for all our flaps out. They're pulling. Okay, now look what happened to RPMs. Now we can throw the propeller forward and see how that did to anything. Alright. Now we're just going to see much. That'll do. Okay, so the point there being, so we waited till the end to throw out the to advance the propeller again, and when we did that, nothing happened, because that would be, so this would be kind of an analogous circumstance. So if we kind of set it to something like, if we had this going on, and it was, and then see, so look, if we advance it further, we kind of have it dialed into 2300 RPM. Now we can kind of pull the power, and see how the RPM starts decaying. And we push it and it doesn't do anything. But if we kind of get to that situation again, and we don't, mess with the power or anything, and then we we're gonna kind of get it to there. We're gonna pull it back to 23 again, and then if you just did it as part of that first sequence check, see the RPM shoots up, and then that's what we're kind of trying to avoid. Trying to avoid the sudden stirs. So what we want is something, again, one more time, like, so if now we have it dialed into 2200 RPM, and then we're just going to pull out some of the power, and then the RPM's dropping on its own first, and then we push it in, and then nothing really it didn't kind of whiz forward. Okay, I hope that made sense. We talk about more advanced concepts soon, and I will try to find a way where we can configure this where I can kind of see what's going on, and it's still a good view for anybody who's watching. All right, clear skies.